Good morning. In our last study, we came to the closing verses of Revelation chapter 9. And we had a disappointing conclusion that even though Christ does an incredible ministry of salvation, some people still did not repent of their unrighteous works. Although Christ placed before them life, and he asked them to choose life, they have remained on the path of destruction. But I want you to notice we haven't come to the end of our focus on the sixth trumpet. You will recall how that in Revelation chapter 9, our attention was drawn to the closing of this information by these words, which we read in verse 12. The first woe is past, 2 other woes are yet to come. Now we haven't seen that phrase yet, and we will come to it, but only in Revelation chapter 11. So this means that somehow we haven't concluded with what we need to understand is going on here in the blowing of the sixth trumpet. So let's look at this. In Revelation chapter 10, it's almost then as if God is drawn a break again. And he wants us to focus on certain things that we need to remember as we look at the message of the sixth trumpet. In Revelation chapter 10 verse 1, I read this. Then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven. He was robed in a cloud with a rainbow above his head. His face was like the sun, and his legs were like fiery pillars. This description is none other than Jesus Christ himself. And it's almost as if God is drawing our attention through John to understand that Christ is busy with a very important ministry, and that our eyes need to be focused on him there where he is standing in the presence of God, interceding on our behalf. We need to actually allow him, with the eyes of faith, that we need to look at him as the author and the finisher of our salvation. We are to keep our eyes fixed on him, and that we are to be changed from moment to moment into his glory. He is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. He places before us life. It is his ministry that we need to lift up so that all mankind will be drawn to him. This is what we pick up. That should never lose our focus. Christ should be the center of our message to the world. I want you to notice further, it says in verse 2, he was holding a little scroll which lay open in his hand. You will recall how that in Revelation chapter 5, we found a scroll that had 7 seals, and it was close to the scrutiny of mankind, and people were weeping. And then the question was asked, who is worthy to open the scrolls? And then we saw the Lamb slain, Jesus Christ. He was worthy to open up the scrolls. And he went and he took the scroll out of the Father's hands, and he began to open it up. In Revelation chapter 6, we saw how that we went through different dispensations of time to come to the period of 1844, the closing dispensation of time, as the 7th seal was opened in Revelation chapter 8 verse 1. We've come to the closing appeal of God to mankind. It's the final work of Christ's righteousness on planet Earth, dear friends. I want you to notice what it says there. He planted his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. It's almost as if Christ is saying, this message that is in my right hand, go and preach it to every nation, kindred, tongue and people. The eternal gospel must be taken to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then only and only then can the end come. Take this message. So interesting, it's standing open in his right hand. He places his foot on the land and on the sea. And I want you to understand that from the densest populated cities to the most remote rural places, this message of what Christ is doing at this moment needs to be taken to the whole world, dear friends. It says there further, he planted his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. And he gave a loud shout like the roar of a lion. Dear friends, This is the loud cry. It's a final cry. When he shouted, the voices of the seven thunders spoke. And when the seventh thunder spoke, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up what the seven thunders have said, and do not write it down. I want you to notice, right here all of a sudden, our attention is taken away from Christ, and we hear a voice from heaven saying, don't write down what the seven thunders have just said. Seal it up. And I want you to notice, our attention is drawn to this. Why has the Father hindered this information? And I want you to understand, in Revelation chapter 10 verse 8, I read this. Then the voice that I'd heard from heaven spoke to me once more. So we find out that somehow our attention is drawn that this person who spoke from heaven, none other than the Father, is now speaking again, and he says, go take the scroll that lies open in the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land. So he says, go to that angel who is standing with that scroll that is open in his right hand, and go and take the scroll. So it says in verse 9, so I went to the angel and asked him to give me the little scroll. This is Jesus now, he's talking to John. He says, take it and eat it. It will turn your stomach sour, but in your mouth it will be as sweet as honey. I want you to understand, somehow this message has already been given. And in 1844, this message was proclaimed. It was given to the world that Christ was soon to come in the clouds of heaven, and that we need to make ourselves ready for it. But you will recall how that later in that year, people didn't experience the return of Christ, and there was this incredible disappointment. But somehow it was sweet in their mouths, but turned sour in their stomachs. But I want you to listen to this. It says then in verse 11, then I was told, you must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, language, and kings. Somehow there is this encouraging instruction given, this command. Go to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, and again bring to them the eternal gospel. You must again do what was done in 1844. Take the message of Christ soon coming to the world, and that Christ is busy with a preparation work, because who can stand when he comes? Only those who've experienced his salvation plan. I want to jump back into Revelation chapter 10. And I want you to notice my attention in verse 5 is drawn to the angel again. Then the angel I had seen standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever and ever. So we notice that our attention again is drawn to this ministry of Christ, and he swears by God's throne. He's saying that he is the creator, and what he's about to share cannot be altered. He says there will be no more delay. The end has come. There will be no more time. I want you to understand, dear friends, we are to go out and to take this message to the world. It's the final call. How will you stand, dear friends? I want you to notice that I link this to Revelation chapter 22. Because in Revelation chapter 22, my attention is drawn to this particular ministry of Christ. In Revelation chapter 22, I read there in verse 10. Then he told me, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, because the time is near. It's almost as if my attention is brought back to the book that I was told not to write down. He says, my attention is drawn back to it. And he says, do not seal it up, because the time is near. The end of time has come. He says there, let him who does wrong continue to do wrong. Let him who is vile continue to be vile. Let him who does right continue to do right. And let him who is holy continue to be holy. It's almost as if the ministry of Christ has now done its work. We have sheep and goats, dear friends. A separation has taken place. Then I want you to notice these words in verse 12. Behold, I am coming soon, and my reward is with me, and I will give to every man according to what he has done. I am the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Dear friends, I want you to understand something that we need to see quite clearly here, and that is Christ is the beginning and the end of the hope of salvation. There is no other name under heaven through whom you can have access to eternal salvation, but through the blood of the Lamb, dear friends. I want to close off with reading out of Revelation chapter 3. And it's a message to those who are living in the last heartbeats of this world. It says there, verse 20, "Here I am," Christ is saying. "I stand at the door and knock." He's standing and he's asking access into your home. He says there, "If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will go in and eat with him and he with me. To him who overcomes, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. He who has an ear, dear friends, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." Dear friends, we are coming to the closing heartbeats of this world. Our attention has been drawn to certain focal points. Won't you please invite Christ into your life? Won't you make him the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last of your hope of salvation? May God help you to make this decision today.